The concrete canal outside Buckeye, Arizona, hasn't carried water since March. Not a trickle, just a chalky white crust along the bottom, where the mineral salts dried and cracked into a pattern that looks like broken pottery. Ray Holloway is 71. He's walking the edge of that canal the way you'd walk past a grave, hands in his pockets, boots kicking up dust that used to be mud. His grandfather dug irrigation lines out here in the 1950s. His father farmed alfalfa on the same acres. And Ray still remembers, as a boy, sticking his bare feet into water so cold it made his teeth ache, in the middle of a 110-degree afternoon. That water's gone now. Not rerouted. Not rationed. Gone. He points to a well casing sticking out of the ground about 40 yards off. That one, he says, used to hit water at 90 feet. Now the pump's set at 400, and it's coughing air by August. He says it flat. No drama. The way farmers deliver bad news they've already made peace with. The land around Buckeye has sunk more than 18 feet in some spots over the last few decades, the ground literally collapsing as the aquifer beneath it empties out. There are fissures out here you could lose a truck tire in. Cracks that open overnight, splitting roads, snapping foundations, tearing through fields like the earth is being unzipped from below. Phoenix. You've heard the headlines. In 2023, the state announced it would stop approving new housing construction in parts of the metro because there wasn't enough groundwater to legally promise the next 100 years of taps. A desert city of 5 million people, built on borrowed water and borrowed time, finally running the math and hating the answer. It made every front page. It became the poster child for the American West drying out, the cautionary tale everyone loves to point at. Here's what almost nobody said out loud. Phoenix was never the exception. Phoenix was the rehearsal. Because while every camera crew in the country pointed at those dry Arizona subdivisions, another American city, bigger in ambition, faster in growth, louder about its own future, was quietly draining the exact same kind of account. Same overdrawn river. Same vanishing groundwater. Same politicians at podiums, promising there's plenty for everyone. And that city has a hard deadline coming that makes Phoenix's slow bleed look almost gentle by comparison. I'm not going to name it yet. Stay with me. Because the reason it's more dangerous than Phoenix isn't the heat, and it isn't even the drought. It's something about how that city was built, and what its leaders keep telling the people who live there. Two things I want you to hang on to. First question. Which city is actually next? Not the one the news keeps warning about, but the one with a reservoir and a legal clock ticking down toward the moment the water stops. Second question, and this is the one that should bother you. If the warning signs were this obvious, this measurable, this documented, why did almost nobody sound the alarm? Both answers are worse than you think, and both come back to Ray, standing at the edge of his dead canal. Look at what actually happened in the Southwest, and you stop seeing separate crises. You start seeing one system failing in slow motion, city by city. The Colorado River is the artery. 40 million people drink from it, farm with it, flush with it, water their lawns with it, across 7 states and Mexico. Lake Mead and Lake Powell are the 2 great reservoirs that hold it back, and both have been dropping for a quarter century. Powell fell to 26% of capacity. The Bureau of Reclamation now projects Glen Canyon Dam could hit dead power pool. The elevation where the turbines can't spin, where the dam keeps standing but stops making electricity, in December 2026. First time in the 63 years since they started filling it. Never happened before. It's about to. That's not weather. That's arithmetic finally catching up to a promise made in 1922, when officials carved up the river based on rainfall numbers from an unusually wet stretch of years. They divided up more water than the river has ever reliably carried. And everyone downstream has been living on that overdraft ever since, spending a paycheck the river never actually earned. Ray understands overdraft. He watched it happen to his own aquifer, 1 foot of water table at a time. When the river ran short upstream, cities and farms did what people always do when the surface water thins out. They drilled. They pumped groundwater, the ancient stuff, water that took 10,000 years to collect underground and can't refill in any time frame that matters to a human being. Phoenix pumped. Buckeye pumped. And the deeper the wells went, the more the ground sank, and the more Ray's neighbors sold out and left. People think the water leaves loud, he told me. Big cracked lake bed, boats in the mud, cameras everywhere. It doesn't. It leaves quiet. It leaves through a pipe you can't see, from a lake nobody's looking at, and by the time it's on the news, it's already too late to stop it. That sentence is the whole story. Because the city I'm about to take you to leaks its water exactly like that. Quiet, invisible, off camera. It has a reservoir most Americans couldn't find on a map, a legal settlement most residents have never read, and a growth rate that dropped tens of thousands of new people, new lawns, new golf courses, on top of a supply that was already spoken for. And its leaders, right now, this month, are still standing in front of ribbon cuttings, promising decades of abundance. Ray finishes his walk along the canal and stops at the well casing. He raps it once with his knuckle. Hollow ring. Empty pipe. They'll figure it out when the tap sputters, he says. Not before. Never before. He's right. That's the pattern. It's what happened in Phoenix, and it's what's about to happen somewhere bigger, faster, and far less prepared to admit it. The dry canal behind him isn't the end of a story. It's the opening scene of one playing out 400 miles away, in a metro that thinks it's untouchable. And the water table there is already dropping, exactly the way Ray's did, right before everything changed. To understand what's coming, you have to look underground, at the part of this story nobody photographs. Rivers make the news. Reservoirs make the headlines. But the real crisis of the American Southwest? It sits below the surface, in the aquifers, and it's been draining for a century without a single camera pointed at it. Here's what most people never learn. When the West ran short on river water, it didn't slow down. It drilled. Cities and farms punched wells into ancient groundwater, water that fell as rain and snow tens of thousands of years ago, water that trickled down and pooled in porous rock long before anyone dreamed of building a subdivision on top of it. That water isn't renewable on any timescale that matters to you or me. Pump it out, and it's gone. For good. Arizona learned this the hard way. By the 1970s, farmers in cities across the state were pulling roughly 2 million acre-feet more out of the ground every year than nature put back. And the land itself started to sink. In parts of the Phoenix Basin, the ground dropped as much as 18 feet through the 20th century. A slow, silent collapse they call subsidence. Giant cracks called earth fissures tore across the desert, some of them miles long, swallowing roads and fence lines whole. The aquifer wasn't just emptying, it was compacting. Once that clay collapses, it can never hold as much water again. You don't get a refill. You lose the tank itself. Permanently. That's the piece nobody puts on a postcard. Arizona passed the Groundwater Management Act in 1980 to stop the bleeding, requiring new developments in certain areas to prove a 100-year water supply before a single house went up, one of the most aggressive water laws in the country. And even that, even with regulation, monitoring, decades of warning, Phoenix still ended up where it ended up. So ask yourself, what happens in a place that never passed a law like that at all? Because that's exactly where this is heading. Look at the map differently for a second. Forget state lines. Forget city names. Just follow the water. The entire Southwest runs on two things: the Colorado River and the groundwater beneath it. The Colorado supplies around 40 million people across 7 states and Mexico. It irrigates roughly 5.5 million acres of farmland. And it was divvied up in 1922 under the Colorado River Compact, based on flow measurements taken during one of the wettest stretches in the river's recorded history. The men who signed that document assumed the river carried about 17.5 million acre-feet a year. The long-term average? Closer to 13 or 14. Some recent years have come in far below even that. They wrote checks against a bank account that was never that full. And everyone downstream has been overdrawing it ever since. So the surface water was oversubscribed from day one, and the groundwater underneath got treated like a savings account with no bottom. Now stack a third thing on top. Growth. Relentless. Unregulated. Ribbon-cutting growth. Here's where I want to stop you. Because the story you think you're being told, the story of a dying phoenix, is a decoy. Phoenix, for all its problems, at least argued about water. It fought about it. Passed laws. Held hearings. Forced developers to prove their supply. The place that should actually scare you did none of that. The place that should scare you is booming right now, this decade, with its leaders on television promising growth as if the desert around them were an ocean. Point yourself toward the fastest growing metro in the country. Then look at what's holding it up. Because the same forces that hollowed out Arizona's aquifers didn't stay in Arizona. They spread. Across Nevada, across Utah, across the high plains and the Great Basin, groundwater levels have been sliding for decades in near silence. In some western basins, water tables have dropped over 100 feet. Wells that used to hit water at 200 feet now have to reach 400, 600, deeper still. And every foot deeper costs money. More pipe, more energy, bigger pumps. The people who feel it first aren't the cities. It's the rural households on shallow wells. The ones who wake up one morning to a faucet that coughs air, just like Ray's did. And the numbers keep pointing the same direction. NASA's GRACE satellites, twin spacecraft that measure tiny changes in Earth's gravity to track where water is disappearing, have watched the Colorado River Basin lose staggering volumes of groundwater over the past 2 decades. More than 40 million acre-feet gone since 2004, by some measurements. That's more water than Lake Mead holds when it's full. Vanished, pulled up through wells, sprayed on fields, evaporated into the sky, and it is not coming back. Now, the twist. You'd assume the smart move, staring at all of this, would be to pump the brakes. Slow the building, cap the wells, cool the growth. That's the rational play. The Southwest did the opposite. Development accelerated. Master-planned communities kept breaking ground in the desert. Golf courses got greener. Data centers, the massive server farms that power everything you stream and scroll, started moving in by the dozen, and those things drink water like nothing else. A single large data center can burn through hundreds of thousands, even millions, of gallons a day just to keep its processors cool. Semiconductor factories, the ones politicians love to announce, need staggering amounts of ultra-pure water to make a single chip. And where are they building them? In the driest corner of the country, on top of the emptiest aquifers. You couldn't design a more contradictory situation if you tried. The land is running dry, and we keep planting the thirstiest possible industries directly into it. Then we act surprised. The reason this keeps happening comes down to something uncomfortable. Water in the West has always been sold as a solved problem. Turn the tap, water comes out, so it must be fine. Every developer's brochure swears the supply is secured. Every city council says the projections are conservative. Every water manager says there's a plan. And technically, on paper, in the near term, they're often not lying. The water is there this year. And next year. The catastrophe isn't tomorrow. It's a decade out, maybe 2, and no politician gets reelected by canceling growth for a problem that lands after they've left office. So the promises pile up, and the aquifer keeps dropping, and the river keeps shrinking, and nobody with the power to stop it wants to be the one who says the desert is full. Think about the psychology of it. A city that's growing feels invincible. New towers going up, Cranes on every skyline. Home values climbing. Jobs pouring in. The population ticking up month after month. Everything screams success. Prosperity. Momentum. And that momentum becomes its own kind of blindness. Because the busier a place gets, the more water it needs. And the more water it needs, the closer it walks to the edge without ever looking down. Prosperity and depletion, running on the exact same track, in the same direction, at the same speed. Nobody notices, because they've been trained to read growth as the opposite of crisis. That's the trap. That's what makes the next city so dangerous. Not that it's dying, that it's thriving, loudly, confidently, on borrowed water it swears it isn't borrowing. The overconfidence is the tell. When a metro's leadership spends more energy reassuring you about water than any thriving place should ever need to, that's not confidence. That's a nervous system reacting to something it can feel, but won't name. The reservoir that feeds this place is already dropping toward numbers its own engineers call unthinkable. The legal clock underneath it, a set of deadlines written into interstate law, is already counting down to a moment when the water simply stops being guaranteed. And almost nobody outside a few hydrologists and water lawyers is even watching the calendar. The city is Las Vegas. And yeah, you expected somewhere obscure, somewhere nobody's heard of. That's exactly why it's so dangerous. 2.5 million people in the Las Vegas Valley. A metro that adds 70,000 new residents a year. A place that pulls roughly 90% of its drinking water from one single source. Lake Mead. Lake Mead sits behind Hoover Dam, and it's been falling for a quarter century. In 2000, it was nearly full. By the summer of 2022, it hit 1,041 feet above sea level, the lowest since the reservoir first filled in the 1930s. And you could see the bathtub ring, that pale mineral scar on the canyon walls, standing more than 150 feet tall. Wet years since then bought a little breathing room. Not enough. The Bureau of Reclamation's own projections keep flirting with elevation 1,000 feet. Go below that, and the machinery of the whole system starts to fail. Here's the part almost nobody understands. Las Vegas doesn't take its water from the top of the lake. It built a straw. A third intake tunnel, 3 miles long, drilled into the bottom of Lake Mead, finished in 2015 at a cost of around $1.5 billion, specifically because engineers watched the surface dropping and realized the 2 older intakes would one day suck air. Then, they built a low lake pumping station. Another $650 million. So they could keep drawing even if Mead fell to near dead pool. Think about what that means. The Southern Nevada Water Authority spent more than $2 billion on infrastructure, whose entire purpose is to keep drinking from a lake as it dies. That's not confidence. That's a city quietly bracing for the worst while its billboards promise fountains. Now the legal clock. The 1922 Colorado River Compact split the river between 7 states, and it did it in a wet stretch, promising more water than the river has ever reliably carried. Nevada got the smallest share of anyone, 300,000 acre-feet a year, a fraction of what California and Arizona draw. The whole arrangement runs on a set of guidelines that expire at the end of 2026. Every state on the river is fighting right now over what replaces them, and the upper basin and lower basin can't agree on who cuts first, or how much. If they can't reach a deal, the decision lands in federal court, and a judge with no stake in Las Vegas's growth gets to decide how thin the smallest straw in the system gets pulled. So watch the calendar. December 2026. That's not a doomsday date. It's a deadline written in interstate law. The moment the old rules dissolve and the guarantees underneath 2.5 million faucets get renegotiated in a room full of lawyers who owe Nevada nothing. Las Vegas has fought harder than any city in America to save itself. Grass is banned from new front yards. They pay you to tear out your lawn, dollars per square foot. Nearly all indoor water gets recycled and pumped back to the lake for credit. Per person use has dropped by more than half since 2002, even as the population exploded. The city's a genuine model of conservation. And it still isn't enough. Because you cannot conserve your way out of a river that no longer carries what the law promised. You can stretch the last of it. You can build a deeper straw. You cannot invent water that the snowpack never delivered. Which brings me back to that canal outside Phoenix. The one running dry in the sun. The lifelong resident standing there watching his water table drop, foot by foot, season by season, wondering when somebody was finally going to say it out loud. He wasn't watching a local problem. He was watching the leading edge of the same wave, now curling over Las Vegas. Phoenix pumped its aquifer until the ground itself sank, subsidence cracks running for miles across the desert floor. It built entire subdivisions on groundwater certificates that assumed the water would still be there in 100 years. And when the state finally admitted, in 2023, that parts of the Phoenix area no longer had the groundwater to justify new sprawl, the growth machine didn't stop. It just moved the promises somewhere else. Las Vegas is running the same play with a faster clock. The reservoir it drinks from is dropping toward numbers its own engineers spent $2 billion preparing for. The legal shield around its supply expires in a matter of months. And the metro keeps growing, keeps building, keeps selling the desert as a place with a future measured in generations, when the honest measurement is closer to the water level in a single lake and the outcome of a single lawsuit. The man by the canal understood something the billboards don't. Water doesn't announce its own ending. There's no siren, no flood, no fire, no single dramatic day you can point to. It just gets a little lower each year, a little farther down the intake, a little thinner in the pipe, until one morning it isn't there, and by then, the arguing's over. Because there's nothing left to argue about. Go stand at your own kitchen sink tonight. Turn the tap. Watch it run clear and full and endless, the way it always has, the way you've never once had to think about. That water traveled from a lake shrinking toward its own gravestone, through a straw drilled into the bottom of it, guaranteed by a law that stops guaranteeing anything this December. Phoenix was the warning nobody heeded. Las Vegas is the one the numbers already point to. And somewhere in the desert, a canal that used to carry a river now carries only wind, while 2.5 million faucets keep running.